Thank you so much. First of all, SherAli, I want to congratulate you because you really connected with the right brothers back home. These are brothers I have a very good understanding of. There are many different tendencies on the field right now, especially right after this July uprising that we had. And I'm very pleased to see that you've connected with these brothers. They've been asking me and urging me for a long time, and I'm very glad they independently did this on their own and connected with you. And thank you again publicly for writing that piece for our brother Sharjeel, which was really phenomenal. I want to ask a more, I guess, broad question because it would be unfair for me to make comments on things I haven't heard from you because you just presented. But I want to ask you about our current situation in Bangladesh, and I think it's relevant to this question of friendship and the notion of secular power and secular violence that you brought up. One of the things that's clear to us that we are basically in a war with the Indian state trying to intervene and influence politics in our country. And it's also clear that there is a particular kind of secularism in Bangladesh that works very closely to support that kind of complicity of the Indian state. We have been talking about using Ashili Mbembe's argument and Assad's argument and joining the two together and calling it the secular necropolitical regime that we just defeated as a people. And we're still dealing with, however, a residual kind of secularism that some of us are sarcastically calling it good secularism, meaning it's actually a kind of disciplinary power now, which is resulting in a kind of disciplining of Islamic subjects and who desire, like you were saying, a different kind of dream.
Yeah.
And this is really important for us. And there are other tendencies who are promoting a kind of post-Islamism already ahead of time, before even engaging in a real encounter with this secular power.
Yeah.
We're opposed to this notion of post ideological idea of post-Islam. We think it's kind of um, imported in from a very Iranian conception of what happened there and trying to kind of program it into Bangladeshi's history and Bangladeshi politics, etc. So I guess it's not really a big question, like a direct question, but sort of your reflections on these sorts of debates that we're having, because it's actually a real concern because we're concretely dealing with the idea of a potentially new constitution. There are many proposals. Some of them are wonderful proposals that kind of articulate the different tendencies and histories of Islam within our own heritage, which includes the Pakistan movement, which we still claim to be a movement in which East Pakistan played a critically instrumental role, and that we cannot look at history in a chronological manner in which everything ended in 71 and we have to just move on with some kind of strange secular dream.
Yeah.
So we have to have a kind of reflection about 47, the significance of having a really robust connection with West Pakistan to have a really clear understanding of the violence of that state. But one thing, Shirley, I was wondering about, and I really was thinking about, and this is not a promotion of
Right.
any kind of opposition to friendship,
Yeah.
but I was wondering about not just that we all know that the modern secular state, the violence of it is unmatched in history. But what I'm interested in is understanding when we're in a serious kind of antagonism with an entire, not just a state, but an entire historiography
Mhm.
about our region.
Yeah.
And and that's a secular historiography in which all of these inclusions are the good Congress version is that let's include all of these different elements and there's going to be religious harmony, etc. What I'm interested in is that I hope it doesn't sound too Schmittian, but the fact that there is war, there is antagonism, these are undeniable things. And under that situation, don't we have a responsibility not only, and I'm not saying you're not doing this, I think I agree with you. I just want to have a further conversation. Doesn't have to be right now. That there is a qualitative difference in different types of violence. Not simply that one is more violent. Of course, we know secularism is more violent, seems to be that even the secularists know that they're interested in a particular quality of violence, a particular mandate to commit violence, and they think it's the more civilized version of violence. They think to discipline Muslim subjectivity through various mechanisms, through its intelligence operations, through its military arm, but also a particular kind of development of the autonomous subject, right? So there is a very specific kind of recalibration of the subject, almost a rearticulation of the soul of the human form. That is the necessary ground of secularism. This is why we see this need to constantly prove to the secular power that we are not the fundamentalists, we're not this, we're not that, etc. Because the point is, they're trying to sneak past the basic elementary antagonism that secularism has very specifically towards Islam, because Islam has a political urgency that actually is very specific to it.
Yeah.
And we sometimes lose sight of that specificity and make it about secularism versus religion. No, war on terror is very specific to Islam and those who can be articulated as adjacent to Islam, of course.
Right.
But this is something I wonder about this qualitative dimension
Yeah.
of the secular power and violence that the secularists themselves are interested in.
Yeah.
And it's never about quantitative part, because we know from Assad's lectures on suicide bombing that basically the liberal subject feels horrified when there is a different notion of violence.
Yeah.
They're okay with millions dead in Gaza,
Yeah.
but as long as the modern state conducts it, they're upset about other articulations of violence, other articulations of, let's call it, problematization in
Right.
Foucauldian terms. So I
Right.
just wanted to hear from you. I'm really sorry that I burned you with this question right there.
No, this is such
Something
an
to think
important,
about.
this is such an important intervention, Tanzeen. And I'm so glad that you're here and that you can contribute these very, very important points. And I just want to add to the kind of list of the purveyors of this liberal secular violence, the state, the intelligence, and so on, the NGOs, the modern academia, the kind of histories and presence of this thing we call South Asian studies. I mean, very recently, I was not there, but I'm told that this annual gathering of South Asian studies that happens in the US in Madison, Wisconsin, apparently there was a panel on Palestine solidarity, and a sort of major scholar who specializes on Bangladesh made the point that the kind of solidarity that Bangladeshis have to Gaza is not premised on Islam. And to her, this was a very important point. This is not an Islamic solidarity, it's not religious. So in some ways, I think the violence of liberal secular power, in fact, begins even before these kinds of things are articulated, precisely because of this common sense, commonplace notion that the secular is some kind of a virtuous good that provides you with some kind of protection from the violence and the irrationality of this category of life called religion and religious solidarity and so on. So, and I think your point about liberal secular violence not only being quantitatively much more magnified, but qualitatively different, I think is very, very important. And I think that's incredibly important to not look at the category of violence in any kind of a generalized abstract fashion, but to actually be very specific about the sources of violence, the kind of preconditions that make possible that violence, the amplified volume of violence, and then the effects of violence. And on all those fronts, there is a certain kind of a liberal secular violence that often gets unchecked and uncritically sort of passed precisely because of this, the entrenchment of this underlying assumption about the opposition of the religious and the secular. So you know what I would say, this is a very, very important political, intellectual battle whereby you see this interesting convergence between the power and sovereignty of a modern state like India, but that then being supported by all kinds of different actors, ranging from, you know, Hindutva activists to scholars to liberal, secular, you know, Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi academics who pretend to be all, you know, for Gaza and cannot, you know, wait to wear on their cafe ears and show on to show their solidarity. But the moment that the whole question of resistance comes in Kashmir, in Gaza, in Bangladesh, they are the ones who, are ahead of the race when it comes to de-religionize and de-Islamize any possibility of political visions or resistance that are premised on or that take as their sources of inspiration some fragments from Islam. And I think what is important precisely is to show that some notion of, for example, interreligious relations, which are not premised on, some kind of physical violence or disrupting the possibility of non-Muslims having meaningful moral and aspire to meaningful lives. That kind of an imaginary can come from the sources of Islam. It does not have to go back to John Locke, right? And that I think is a very important point to make. And on that front, you can in fact be critical of your own tradition. You can say, for example, that look, these scholars, when they were talking about Muslim-non-Muslim relations, had a particular kind of political context of Muslim empire that informed their views. We do not have to take everything that they articulated, but we will engage in a process of creative translation, where we will not jettison the whole tradition, we will not completely discard the whole tradition, but we will not also uncritically translate it in ways which are not dynamic. I mean, every translation, leads to the translated uh, continues what was the object of translation, but it is also different from it. Every translation has a creative kind of impulse. Why can that translation not happen within the Muslim intellectual tradition? Why does it have to be constantly the translation into a liberal secular project of modern state? So I think that is precisely the kind of intellectual and political battle. But I absolutely want to endorse and further amplify the point you made about looking at the qualitative differences between liberal secular violence and other forms of violence, and to approach this problem as a configuration of different actors who come together to exert this kind of pressure of somehow moderating your own religious self and identity. And we're seeing that in today's US academy in terms of how the encampments and pro-Palestine protesters are being policed all the way to South Asia. And these things are very interrelated. To look at these things very interrelated, Gaza, Kashmir, Bangladesh, what is happening in Tunisia, they all have their own different dynamics, their own actors, their own trajectories, their own specific histories. And Pakistan, for example, today even, but they're all connected with a common liberal secular kind of march or teleology, whereby you gain your salvation by eclipsing the political power of Islam. And to always remind these liberal secular actors that what they are proposing and what they're doing is also deeply theological. This is a secular theology at work, which is much more violent and has caused much more violence, even empirically speaking, than any vision or notion of Islam. So I think, yeah, we need to make this point, but we need to make this point boldly. And I think the time has ended where we make it through these kinds of, implicit ways or in ways which we hint at these things. I think we just have to come out in the open and really call out people for their liberal secular violence and assumptions. And it will be a bit antagonistic, but it's worth it. I think we need to do that.
Well, thank you so much, SherAli. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Tanzeen.